my favorite movie of 2019 to sort of combine these 2 points together was The Lighthouse by Robert Eggers, starring Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson.
Only Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson.
Pretty
I think there was
much,
like 3 cast members in the whole movie.
Basically,
They're her and the mermaid.
Yes.
That's it.
So that was my favorite movie of the year, easily, by a landslide. And that was the movie that I recommended Devon watch before we started recording. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
I thought that this was a very, very different movie. We had a little conversation before about how I think movies get picked to be made. I have a very hard time picturing how this movie got picked to be made because the pitch, I mean, it's kind of bare bones, if you know what I mean. There's 2 guys on an island, and it's pretty much like, and then go from there. Like it's sort of conceptually, it's hard for me to see how a bunch of studio heads thought that they could make money off of it, which in a way it makes it even more of a miracle that it got made at all, because I do think it's a very good film. There's a lot of good things in it. I thought that the soundtrack of it, like the director clearly likes to make these harrowing psychological movies that sort of wear down on your psyche a little bit. The soundtrack of the movie does that wonderfully. It's almost comparable to like the first 10 minutes of Shutter Island when they're cruising into the island and going through all the security measures. There's like this horrible, almost like 1950s horror sounds with big trumpets and like screeching violins and stuff. Like it's very like almost like Martin Scorsese wants to make you insane before you even get into the insane asylum.
Right.
And this movie is just, it's throughout. It doesn't let up. It is constant.
And what I love about that too is those noises you mentioned. Like at first when I was watching the movie, I was like, oh, that's a pretty interesting soundtrack. But then when they get on the island, you find out, oh, that's not the soundtrack. That's the noises coming from this lighthouse.
Yeah, there's like a constant foghorn in the back that is like, it really wears down on your psyche as you're watching it, and you really sort of. It pushes you to identify with the Robert Pattinson character, which that's the next thing we have to talk about, is the amazing job that the 2 actors in this movie do.
Definitely.
Absolutely stunning, because they both went out of their way to learn very specific regional dialects and time period accurate dialects.
Right.
Robert Pattinson in this sounding like a pre-Civil War Yankee Northerner, almost at times a little glimmer of a New York sort of accent, but that was accurate for the time and the place. And Defoe just sounding like
Captain Ahab.
Yeah, Captain Ahab, more or less. But very, the way he talks is very. It's almost, I want to say rural, but in a like a boatman sort of way.
He's a stereotypical
sort of way.
He's a stereotypical captain that you always see whenever you like see a pirate character.
You almost
in, like,
expect
a
him to have a peg leg and
that's
a
what
patch,
you
eye
think
patch.
of. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, and there was never a moment in the dialogue where I think that they slipped or anything like that. Like the accents, they were fully in character the entire time, and that doesn't just mean accents; it means everything. Mannerisms, Defoe constantly gnawing on his corncob pipe, or Robert Pattinson. He just does a really great. Like, I feel like Robert Pattinson is really the unappreciated gem of this movie.
Yeah.
Like, if Willem Dafoe was the T-Rex of Jurassic Park, then Robert Pattinson is the Velociraptor.
Exactly.
He's the come from behind, because he spends the first half of the movie acting very annoyed, and it's just combined with the soundtrack and everything else that the director is doing to wear down on you, it really puts you in the same boat as him, gets you into an idea of what kind of headspace this character is in.
Right.
And then Defoe is just like, I have nothing but praise for Defoe in this movie. He goes from funny to terrifying in 1 second, and then back to funny. Like, it's just such a skill for an actor to be able to have, to just pull so many strings at once, and there's an interesting mentor-mentee relationship, mentor-apprentice relationship in this movie, which I think a lot of people can relate to. And the way that sort of, I mean, even though it's kind of old-timey and he sort of talks down to the younger guy in a way that you might not today, it's very gritty, and it's just done very well. It's done very well, I find.
Right.
The writing is excellent, because if you're anything like, if you want to get into the industry, or if you've done any kind of script writing, you'll listen to this dialogue and think, was it written that way, or like, did they improv a little bit? Because there are things that Defoe says you're like, I don't even know how I would spell that. Like that was just a noise. Like, and then he's like, yeah, a beaut,
yeah, exactly.
And I don't know. I just thought it was a like, and at times these characters, you know, they're bonding with each other 1 minute, and then, well, it starts off as a very cold relationship, and then they sort of bond a little bit, you know, and then the main character starts opening up to drinking a little more, and then they get really friendly, and then they are, you know, and then they hate each other again. Like the dynamic that between two people, especially in a mentor-apprenticeship relationship, that you can have is very well explored, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I one thing I think we should say, I should have said this before we started talking. For those who haven't seen the movie, the gist of it is you have the whole movie takes place on this like tiny island in a lighthouse, and like you said, Willem Dafoe is like the hardened like
he's
Captain Ahab guy, who's been there for years.
It's not clear if he was actually a captain of anything, but he just is sort of living reclusively.
He's the knowledgeable one.
He's the current lighthouse attendant.
Yeah.
And he's training Robert Pattinson to be the new lighthouse attendant.
Right.
And Defoe has sort of gone crazy in his isolation.
Exactly.
Yes.
But what I love about it is you keep on mentioning that throughout the whole first act of the movie, we pretty much stick solely with Robert Pattinson and how he's sort of taking in his surroundings and
all
of these like
the maintenance of the
exactly
lighthouse
like listening to this guy say all of his like it's bad luck to not finish a toast, bad luck to kill a seagull. Like you're sort of like absorbing, you're learning along with him. But then once we start to get into like the second act and once things start to get crazy, we kind of almost get removed from it. We're sort of like watching the two of them rather than watching Willem Dafoe through the eyes of Robert Pattinson. You know what I mean? Like once they both start to go crazy, we kind of step back and we're looking at this situation and we're saying, man, this is kind of fucked up. Like, and it all just builds to it. I guess we like spoiler free up till now, but spoilers if you haven't seen The Lighthouse yet, you should go see it. Easily my favorite movie.
I have nothing but praise for this movie. This is one of the most unique movies I've seen in years.
Yeah.
And I think it might have a specific audience, maybe not. I mean, like I said before, it's kind of like Robert Pattinson saw one of these 1700s sea shanties memes and decided he wanted to make a movie where he could legitimately sing sea shanty memes.
Exactly.
He's like, what, you can get Willem Dafoe in here to do that too? Absolutely, get him in here. He's going to try his balls off to be like a genuine, accurate sea shanty singer. Like,
exactly.
And they do sing sea shanties in this movie. It's brilliant. Anyway.
So then, going on to spoilers, the one thing like I really want to touch on, and I think this clip is available on YouTube if anyone's on the fence about watching this, but hands down, my favorite scene in that entire movie is when Robert Pattinson is drunk, and Willem Dafoe is maybe a little drunk, but mostly sober.
Describe 50% of the movie so far.
They're sitting up in their like sleeping quarters, and I forget what happens right before it, but Robert Pattinson is like talking about how he misses being on mainland, and Willem Dafoe is kind of making fun of him. And there's this like just silent moment where they're just like sitting around, nothing's happening, and Willem Dafoe just goes, "What?" And Robert Pattinson looks up at him and is like, "What?" And they just back and forth. It's in the trailer. They start screaming at each other.
What?
Exactly.
They're barking at each other at the same time, pretty much.
Someone told me they were like, that's meant to be a metaphor for the seagulls squawking at each other because
interesting.
Because Robert Pattinson, because Willem Dafoe says in seagulls are the souls of sailors, and that's why you don't kill them is because it's bad luck. You've just damned a soul to hell. So they were saying that like you could equate the what to the sound of like a bunch of seagulls yelling at each other, which I didn't even think of. But
yeah,
that scene is the epitome of everything I love about that movie, like you said, because it's marketed as a horror movie, but it's really funny.
It is strangely funny,
and not like in a horror comedy, not like Get Out, where it's like you have moments of like you do have moments of release, and
like levity. But this movie is funny, almost in a sadistic way.
Exactly. So like you'll have that moment where they're yelling at each other, what, and then that's followed up with it's like weird, but it's hilarious in its own right. And then you have Robert Pattinson being like, I want some real food. I'm tired of the food you cook. And then Willem Dafoe turns into this like sad little like puppy who's like, well, surely you like my lobster, don't you? And Robert Pattinson's just this drunk asshole who's like, no, I hate your lobster. And then just out of nowhere, Willem Dafoe stands up and goes on this like 4-minute long like
I was gonna talk
monologue.
about the exact same
Yeah.
scene. I was gonna talk about the exact same scene.
I've never seen someone go from like
Not
such
only
a
is it a
sad
monologue,
puppy.
it's a curse. He's like reading out a prayer of. He's like hopes that Poseidon comes in and rips his balls off or something,
Exactly.
and drowns him, and corals growing off of him or something.
Right.
And like, just leave his corpse for the crabs or some crazy. He just goes on for so long. I don't even think he blinked the entire
He didn't.
time.
I watched it and he didn't.
The entire take was brilliant, and I think it was all in one take, and so
Yeah.
it's just something that is brilliant that Willem Dafoe is absolutely
Exactly.
brilliant in that. And there's also some really hidden, really memorable insults in this movie.
Yes.
I think there's a part where it might be not too far after that scene where Robert Pattinson is drunk again and he says something like, "You smell like curdled foreskin."
Yes.
Or something like that. That's brilliant. That is
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah,
It is
yeah.
a great line.
There's a whole bunch of like that's what makes me think that like none of this dialogue was improvised because like how do you come up with that?
Yeah.
That had to have been written.
It had to
Like,
have been, yeah. And whoever wrote it, they were like, turned to the other writer and gave him a high five. They're like, "Yeah, that is good. That is good."
Exactly. But yeah, that's the other thing that like the main thing that I love about that movie whenever I think about it is like I said it switches up from being very disturbing and very uncomfortable to having these moments of just hilarity.
Mm-hmm.
And that scene is the quintessential example because you start off with like being kind of disturbed by how upset Robert Pattinson is getting over like that he hasn't had a steak in weeks. And then the next line is Willem Dafoe being like, "You don't like my cooking?" And like that makes you laugh your ass off. And then Willem Dafoe literally from one line to another goes from "I've seen it, you're fond of my lobster, aren't you?" to "Let Neptune strike you dead." And it's like, and it's such like a quick switch, and it's terrifying, but it doesn't feel out of place. It like it somehow feels so natural, and
Well,
I've never seen anything like that.
It's you've been put on this place with Robert Pattinson, who sort of it's like two things going around a whirlpool. It's just getting closer and closer with each pass.
Yeah.
And it's gotten to the point where this character that you are with, that you are training to become you're training to get his job, so you're bound to become like him in many ways.
Yeah.
He's clearly off his rocker and just like not in any kind of reality that you yourself have been in, because he's insulted about silly things like his cooking, and he takes it so personally that he goes out of his way to instill a Poseidon or a Neptune-based curse on him. Yeah, yeah. So this movie is in black and white, which is kind of an unusual choice for 2019. But I feel like it worked.
It did work, and one thing that you had mentioned before we started recording was the aspect ratio.
Yes,
and
that too. This movie is almost practically square.
Yeah, and the reason why I did some reading about that, and the director had said that the movie takes place, for those who don't know, it's like 1890, I think, is the year that they provide as like when this all happens. Like 1890s New England, and the director had said something like he wanted to imitate how it would feel if you were watching like an old piece of film from the early 1900s where everything is square and there's no color and it's just sort of drained. And I think the fact that it is black and white, because like what color would you have to look at out in that scenario?
That's very
you
true.
have the ocean, you have
If
it's
you were to
always
have,
storming.
if that's an
like-
interesting point. If you were to have color anyway, your palette would only be grays, overcast day, sand, and ocean and seagulls, and like that's your whole color palette. The Lighthouse is white.
Exactly.
So you might as well just take all the color away, and then it
Yeah.
allows you to do some very creative things with the lighting.
I think that's what one of the reasons why it makes it so scary is because that scene when Willem Dafoe is delivering this curse down on Robert Pattinson, the only light in the room is this like lantern.
The lantern
that's
on the table,
floor,
yeah.
and it's casting all these harsh shadows up at his face, and he looks like a monster when he's talking. With all you
Yeah.
see is his like big scraggly beard, his like shiny bright teeth, and like his wide open eyes, and you're like,
He does. He
it
almost looks like
subconsciously makes
a
you scared of
cawing
him.
baboon at some point. like-
Exactly.
and
yeah.
and that's interesting because I think that moment occurs probably a little bit past the halfway point in the
around
movie.
there, yeah.
And then from there, it just gets like the whole point of their post becoming less and less human. Like by the end, they're like peeing on the floor and stuff. Like they
Yeah,
just
yeah.
don't care anymore. I just thought the watching the de-evolution of that it's very well done.
One thing that I kind of want to get into a little bit of, and I wish I had more to say about this. I had some notes about it, but one thing that people like to, or one theory that's been bouncing around is that none of what happened in this movie is real, and it's all a metaphor for what's going on inside the head of Robert Pattinson after he killed his former coworker. Because one thing that they say is that Willem Dafoe's character's name is Thomas.
Yeah.
And I forget what Robert Pattinson's name is, but he comes out
as
midway through the movie and he says, "This isn't my real name. I stole it from somebody. My name is actually Tom."
Yeah.
So it is like, okay,
that's started spouting theories about how that was maybe the same person.
Right. They could be the same person, or it's meant to be like Robert Pattinson. The character we see, Robert Pattinson, is his conscious mind trying to like move on and deal with the fact that he's killed this person and trying to like escape by literally removing himself from society. And Willem Dafoe is like the nagging part of his brain that is constantly bringing him down and being like, you know what you did, why'd you spill your beans? Like it is like trying to like make him realize what a terrible person he is. And that's where a lot of the conflict of like Robert Pattinson being like, I hate you, your cooking's terrible, you fart all the time, I hate living with you. Like it's a matter of like they're literally in the movie they're trapped together basically on this island, but if you're looking at it through that perspective, you're trapped in your own head and you can't run away from your subconscious that is telling you these things about yourself.
There's an interesting scene in that movie where he does bury him and then he comes back later to attack him again, and if you're working with that theory, that part is interesting because if that theory is true, then he's already done the burying. Right. And that's already done. And he found Robert Pattinson. There was also another scene where he finds a body part in the lobster cage. Remember that? Where he accuses Willem Dafoe's character of the one doing the murder.
Yeah.
So that would be interesting if he was actually the one who did the murder, and then he's actually like accusing him of that.
Exactly.
Doing like a reflection kind of thing, like you are what I see in myself, kind of thing.
Right.
There's just what the other amazing thing about this movie is how much it does with just the setup of two people on an island, the lighthouse. Like the range of dynamic, like the relationships that these two go through, and the situations that you can have with that. It just amazes me that writers can actually that they can write something like that. The writing is amazing.
Yes.
Basically, it kept me guessing the whole time, definitely for sure. Like from one moment to the next, I was like, I have no idea what could possibly happen. Are they going to get relieved? Is the supply ship going to show up in the middle of the storm? Are they both going to kill each other, and then the supply ship is going to show up and both of them are going to be dead?
Yeah.
Or, like, what's going to happen? Like, honestly, it was...
and that's one of the best, like talk about, like, being simplistic in a horror movie. That scene where they're supposed to be on that island for 4 weeks, and then the ship is going to come and relieve the two of them and put 2 new people on the island. That scene where they're like, okay, our time is up. They're waiting on the rock for the boat to show up all day. Like, it shows them in the morning, storm gets worse, and at nighttime no one's shown up. And then just cuts them back, like, having dinner, and Robert Pattinson, I think, just literally says they didn't show up. Like, that's such, like, it's so intense and horrific, and it's very simplistic in the way it does things. Like, it's through just little moments of like they didn't show up, or Willem Dafoe, like just the little things he does where he's like, I'm the only one who's allowed to go upstairs
up to the actual lighthouse itself. The whole time he has swab it again, swab the deck again. Like he really puts Pattinson through the ringer in terms of being an apprentice. He makes him do all the shit jobs, pretty much. And he gets the laid back. And he gets the lighthouse.
Yeah.
And like as he's training for that job, he's actually supposed to be doing the wick, doing the main operating of the lighthouse itself. But Dafoe hoards it all to himself.
No, that's my job.
Yeah. And then at the end of the movie, Pattinson gets up there, and I'm not even sure if he was looking for enlightenment or if he found enlightenment. There's some kind of symbology with lighthouses and enlightenment. The lighthouse was in Annihilation as well. That was the focal point of the...
Yeah.
So there's something about lighthouses and surrealism.
It's like a beacon. It focuses your attention.
Yeah, well, it could mean many things. It could mean, that you're going to be home soon if you're a sailor.
Yeah.
It could mean or it could just mean light.
Exactly. And that's
sweet,
a good way.
Light.
That's a good way of watching this movie, is because you can look at it and treat it as a very like concrete. This is what it's all actually happening. This is Robert Pattinson is growing crazy. Willem Dafoe is already crazy, and he's mentally manipulating Robert Pattinson to go crazy. Like there's the scene where Pattinson tries to get into a lifeboat and leave, and Dafoe like cuts it to bits with an axe, and then 10 seconds later, Defoe's like, man, what was up with that axe a second ago? Why'd you chop up the lifeboat? And then there's like a whole bunch of moments like that where Defoe is trying to make Robert Pattinson think he's the one.
They do try to play
going
each other
crazy.
off of that, that. Yeah. So the most inexplicable thing about this movie is that if you watched it and had no idea what year it came out in, you might say, since it had Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe in it, you might say, oh, this came out in like 2006 or something like that.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
this is clearly like some kind of art house film. That my point is, you want to appreciate movies like this because they just don't get made anymore. Movies like this,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
It's,
Like
they're timeless.
directors and writers are afraid of taking big, bold steps and really exploring human relationships and what really can be done with an hour and a half of film, when the possibilities are really limitless, and yet we choose to do almost the same thing every time with blockbuster hits, with the quips and same color palettes every time, 5 Transformers movies in a row, what have you.
Right.
You just don't see movies like this anymore, and you want to reward that because I think it's a very rewarding experience to watch it. You'll laugh, you'll be wondering what's going to happen, you might cry. Yeah, you might be questioning your own sanity by the end of it. I know I was, but I overall I very much did enjoy The Lighthouse. Thank you for the recommendation.
Of course,
I
yeah.
really did like it.
It's easily my favorite movie of the year, and I'm really glad that it's been getting the attention it's been getting. Because, like you said, there's movies just like this just don't get made anymore.
Absolutely not.
I say it all the time when people are like, "Man, why people keep on making emoji movies?" It's like, well, every time you buy a ticket, you're voting with your wallet. You're telling that studio, "I want to see more of this." So I think that the fact that a movie like this is getting as much exposure as it is only helpful to
Absolutely.
the industry. It's gonna encourage more people to take risks. It's gonna encourage studios to fund more risky ideas, and it's only gonna make things more interesting down the line, movie-wise.
I agree. I think it's a great thing that lots of people are talking about this movie and getting the ball rolling and getting their friends to see it, because it is not, like I said, it's not a traditional movie. It is everything's out of left field, and it's very rewarding for a viewer to stick with it and go through and watch the whole thing. I know you might get off-put by the black and white, but I know after 10 minutes I didn't even notice it. I mean, I've watched lots of black and white movies, but
Yeah.
after 10 minutes you don't even notice it. You're so absorbed in the atmosphere that it creates and the plot and the situation and characters
Right.
that you don't even need color. You don't even need a full aspect ratio.
Exactly.
Which, framing this movie, that's a whole other thing. With a whole different aspect ratio, framing this movie must have been completely different. Like, you know what I mean? With almost I think the ratio is like 1 to 19 to 1 or something like that.
Exactly.
It's almost
a perfect square.
Yeah. And that's what they used to do. That's how cameras originally started. So
Yeah.
it has a very, very good effect.
Definitely. Yeah. It definitely puts you like subconsciously back in that time period.
Yeah. Along with the amazing performances, definitely.
Mhm.
The Lighthouse.
If Willem
Highly
Dafoe
recommend.
doesn't get an Oscar for this movie, I would be
Has he
very
ever
sad.
won an Oscar?
He was nominated last year. He was in a movie where he played Van Gogh, the guy who cuts off his ear.
Really?
Yeah, he was
Oh, I gotta
nominated,
see
but
that.
he did. I saw clips of it, and it didn't look that great. But I mean, yeah, he's very talented. I think that
I think he is very
He should
talented.
definitely get
I think so too.
at least a nomination.
For this,
Yeah.
because sometimes they'll send him the wrong message if you give it to him a year late. Like if it was this performance that's really remembered, but then you give it to him for something next year, as the actor, it sends all sorts
Which
of
that
mixed
happens
messages.
a lot too.
Yeah.
With especially with the Oscars, like DiCaprio doing a really amazing performance in Wolf of Wall Street, and then a year or two later getting one for The Revenant. It almost feels like okay, we'll give you one since you've been nominated this many times.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. We're not going to reward the
The exact movie that you just kind of almost deserve it for.
right.